Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. So, to the surprise of no one who wasn't on the payroll over certain campaigns, Trump crushed the Iowa caucuses. I think this was going to be an obvious result, but it still seemed to be very confusing for a number of people on the internet, a number of kind of professional political actors. And so I wanted to dive into what this overwhelming win in the caucuses means for Trump, what it means for the other candidates who have been in the race. We already have one, Vivek Ramaswamy, who has stepped away and endorsed Trump. What this is going to mean for the rest of the primary season, and then of course, most importantly, what should we expect in the 2024 election? And coming to break down all of this with me is everyone's favorite frog, the Prudentialist. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me on, Auron. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. I know we don't do a lot of rank punditry on the show. We don't do a lot of horse race politics, but I figured today was a good time to put our toe in the water because I do think there are a lot of larger lessons that are important for people to learn from the results we saw in yesterday's election. But before we get started with that, guys, let me tell you about a documentary that is now on the Blaze. Glenn Beck and, of course, the Blaze Originals team went over to Liberty County, Texas, and what they found there was crazy. This documentary shows that this development Colony Ridge is blowing up. It's growing extremely fast. They're selling like 200 lots a week, and there's already supposed to be 35,000 people there, according to the developer, even though it looks like by many local officials that it's double that number. And it's very clear that most of the people there are not native English speakers. They're not native citizens. And the fact that this housing development is just exploding in this manner is just wild. It seems pretty obvious that there's an incentive for these people to come across the border and immediately be given government assistance that the developer can then profit off of. We already know that there's been at least 8 million illegals encountered since Biden took office. And we know that at the rate things are going, we could see 10 million or more by the time he's done. So if you want to understand what's going on and in Colony Ridge, what's happening in Texas, and the way it's transforming and impacting the people who live there, the devastating impact it's having on the lives of American citizens as all these illegals are moved into the state, make sure to check out the Blaze Original. You can go to blazeoriginals.com and you can go ahead and subscribe to the Blaze so you can get documentaries like this. You can use the code Colony Ridge for $30 off. Make sure to check that documentary out, guys. All right, so Prudentialist. Again, I've been predicting this for a while. I don't think this was a big surprise to you, but Trump didn't just win, the caucuses here. He blew them away. He came in with 51% of the vote. The closest person was Ron DeSantis with 21%. He's the next closest candidate. Nikki Haley comes in at 19, just barely losing to DeSantis, and then Vivek comes in at 7%. Why do you think so many people were convinced that Trump was going to lose Iowa in this situation?
Yeah, but before we do that, I just want to give a shout out to the 191 people that decided to show up and sit their butts down in the freezing cold to vote for Asa Hutchinson. I don't know who you are or what you believe in, but you're a man of your word,
Yeah.
and if that's what you believe in, sir, there's a helicopter ride waiting for you, and I got a bridge to sell you in Alaska. But I think people were really deciding to say that Iowa was anyone's game. I think everyone was sort of getting high on their own supply, but primarily I think it is because there has been zero to no media coverage over Trump whatsoever. And so no one was paying attention to the ground game for Trump. I know he's been on a few town halls on the cable news networks, but outside of that, because Trump is not on Twitter, because Trump is sort of playing really a media silence game, where the only time you really talk about him is in the context of, is he losing to, Joe Biden in these polls? Is he losing to his primary contenders? And it's always in opposition to what he actually stands for. And so no one's talking about the fact that Trump wants to have people on his Project 2025 plan to, curtail and gut the civil service. He wants to deport millions of people on day one of taking executive action. The whole scaremongering over him being a dictator for a day, which, isn't that bad. But I think it really does
Only
indicate
a
that
day.
only a day. I know you get so disappointed. You're like, really, only a day? Like I could live with the Cheeto for a few more years than that. But anyways, I think it is a lot of people just living within their own bubbles, more or less. Is that you have a media apparatus that isn't even conservative media, just regular media in general, doesn't want Trump to win. They want him in prison or defenestrated or whatever. And of course, the DeSantis, the Haley crowd, everyone's looking for the magical Trumpism without Trump formula. And as we saw in Iowa, that was not what the people wanted. And I mean, it's been very clear since the get go when Trump announced. Yeah, there was some sort of, there was some contentious battles between him and DeSantis very early on in the polls. But then DeSantis opened his mouth and the spaghetti flew out of his pockets, and his online parasocial sort of paid network of people happened to be the most annoying people on earth. And I don't think that bode particularly well for him. And so now the race isn't between anybody. I mean, it is still Trump's primary nomination to lose, whether the RNC decides to stab him in the back or he goes to jail or whatever. This race is really between the neoconservative faction of the party, which is the Nikki Haley's of the world. Ron, I like Ron, but Ron isn't the threat here. It's between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, but Trump has the commanding lead of these voters, and the vitriol we've seen both from other Republican Party affiliates, but more importantly, the mainstream media. I mean, the Joy Reid from MSNBC made it abundantly clear that her blood libel against, white evangelical Christians that voted for Trump was finally some really honest moments of television where she's like, they're overrepresented. These people are a threat to America. They want these people to bow down to them. They just want their country back. And because these people share the sentiment that the country is off track, millions of people have been pouring into this country, the Border Patrol is facilitating an invasion of the United States, and we've been wasting billions of dollars on wars that have gotten us nowhere. I'm voting for the guy that says America first, whether he's for America or not. And yeah, Trump blew it out of the water, and that should surprise no one except the people high on their own supply.
Yeah, Joy Reid discovering that there are white people in Iowa was a fascinating piece of television.
Or there are millions of us.
Yeah, it was hilarious. But yeah, there seems to be, look, like you said, I like Ron DeSantis. He is my governor. I think he does a great job as governor. I have expressed many. I know people with alligators in their names on Twitter don't don't listen to this. But as I've said many times, he's incredibly capable. I think that he probably was the heir apparent of the Republican Party in 4 years if he had just kind of understood the political situation. And I'm glad, I'll say this, I'm very glad that it seems like, he still be out Nikki Haley, who I understand a lot of people are like, oh, DeSantis is part of the machine, but part of the machine. Not in the way Haley is. I'm sorry. That's a different animal. And I think the fact that she came in third is good. I think that's a positive thing that shows that hopefully this is a dead or dying version of the party that's hanging on kind of by the skin of its teeth. And hopefully she can just kind of be removed from the standings here with the next couple of primaries. But it did seem very strange. Like, I understand, as you said, when there's when Trump is not there in the debates, and he received a lot of criticism for not being part of the debates, everyone felt like he owed them to be in the debates. This was the line that he's owed to be in the debates. Of course, anyone who knows anything about politics knew that it was wise for him not to appear on the debate stage. He's functionally an incumbent. He's lapping the competition. The only thing he can do by putting himself in that room is lose something. There's nothing to gain when you're already more than double the next opponent's totals when it comes to polling. And so there's no reason for him to be in there other than people just kind of calling him mean names. But his lack of presence did change the dynamic. It did seem to give people some hope where there wasn't hope. Oh, well, what if we have a really strong Iowa ground game? A lot of people, I know it's particularly DeSantis invested a lot in the strategy up front of making sure if you can just take the momentum out of Trump's sails, you can get in there and land a punch early, hit him on the nose and make him look weak early on. Then you can gain momentum. I mean, what do you think about the fact that he did not step down after this loss? A lot of people expected that losing, it's not like he lost by 5 points. He got destroyed in the caucus. What do you think about the fact that he has not stepped down yet, when many people expected that without this kind of momentum, it's going to be very difficult for him to win going forward?
Well, traditionally, you would stay on, especially if the front runner hasn't decided who's going to be in his cabinet or who his vice president is going to be. But a recent Fox News interview had stated that he's already had his vice presidential picked, more or less already selected, and so that does throw sort of the traditional knowledge out there. But I mean, people are still have a lot of money invested in both Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, is looking for alternatives to Trump and what they can do and how they can flex on their policies and ideas and get them out there into sort of the Republican ether. I mean, Asa Hutchinson has also dropped out. Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out and has immediately endorsed Donald Trump right afterwards. So, I mean, Vivek's 7% support, I guess, is going over to him. But it does illustrate, I think, that they still want him gone, and I think that a lot of the strategy that both Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are fighting over is that, listen, Biden and all these people within the regime, within these various district attorneys in New York, the attorney generals, people in the Justice Department or in Georgia, they want Trump in prison, right? They want him out of the race. They want him barred. And we still have to remember that there are ongoing Supreme Court cases, or at least they're going to hear the cases about Trump being banned from the primary ballots in in states that participate in Super Tuesday in March. And that's, that's less than 2 months away from now. So you have things moving very quickly where people are really trying to make sure that Donald Trump is not even on the ballot for, the Republican nomination for president of the United States. And so, as it is and has been with the Republican Party for as long as I've been alive and longer than I've been alive, it is a party apparatus that are a bunch of beautiful losers that hate what the voters want. And so, yeah, we would like the voters have made it very clear in Iowa, and has been resoundingly clear for party loyalty, at least when it comes to Trump, that they want to see jobs come back to the United States, that they want their border actually secured, and for the border to even exist, and for millions of illegal immigrants to be deported and sent back to their countries of home while withdrawing from disastrous foreign conflicts abroad. And for that reason, and the people that are voting for it, predominantly white Americans, the party hates them, and they have no problem working with Democrats like Oklahoma Senator Lankford about having pathways to citizenship and not doing anything about the border at all except what the Democrats want. So yeah, it's going to be the usual party apparatus versus the will of the people, and that shouldn't surprise anyone as to why a disastrous Indian version of Hillary Clinton is running for the Republican nomination, and why Ron DeSantis is still in the race despite the blowouts that they both received.
This is something that I've tried to communicate, and I think it's just people who are married to the system. I think they're honest. I think they want a change. I don't think they want the same old thing. And they look at what Trump did in office, especially when it comes to things like COVID, and they say he failed. And I get it. Like, he was awful on that stuff. They're right that this is a guy who did not deliver on many of his promises. And they're saying, well, what we need is somebody who can just be more professional, who won't have the personal baggage, who won't have this stuff, and they'll execute the policy, because it's really about properly executing policy. If we can just get someone into the executive office and he just knows which levers to pull and which things to manipulate, then all of the pieces will snap into place, and then a slight modification of the standard GOP slate will suddenly be implemented, and that will save the country. And they don't understand the level of complete rejection the voters are issuing to the Republican Party. They don't get that it's not just Trump, it's not just DeSantis, it is the entire system that is on trial. It is the entire thing, top to bottom. It is the Republican Party as an entity. It is the American government as an entity. It is the priorities of the ruling class in their entirety, and the way that they have treated the core of America that is actually up for a vote. They don't get that. They don't understand that Trump is deeply flawed. Yes, he's a mess in many areas, but the people who voted for Trump voted for American identity. That was what was in the election in 2016. That's what created the momentum. For the first time in a long time, a voter base that was deeply suppressed suddenly recognized that perhaps their interests could be listened to. And Trump, they deserve better than Trump. They absolutely deserve better than Trump. But it's very clear to them that he's the only guy who's going to speak to these things, that he understands a problem that the others don't. And that doesn't make him a good guy, and that doesn't make him an effective guy, and that doesn't make him a savior or anything. But people just did not grasp this. And so when they look at the results, they just want to lecture the voter base. Oh, why can't you just pick someone responsible? Why can't you just pick somebody who's got the right, clean cut look, who's got, the professional execution? And the answer is that they've elected a million of those people, and none of them have made good on their word, because Trump might be undisciplined. But what that does, that unhinged nature of Trump, allows him to say things and touch something about America that none of these other guys do. And that's what I think is so hard for people who are holding on to this idea that if we just get a more effective guy into office, that's the key. They don't grasp. They're just desperately waiting for a moment when politics is going to go back to normal. And politics is not going back to normal, guys. It's not going back. And you need to grasp that if you need to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. I mean, there's the web comic where like, hey, what's underneath that mask? And then they're like, well, let's keep the mask back on. Well, we can't put the mask back on, especially when we've seen for years, and especially since Trump, ran and was president, and how the reaction, everything that happened in 2020 that took place, that mask can't go back on. There is an unfettered ethnic hatred for the people that voted for Trump by the Democratic Party. You can't put the mask back on after that. You can't look at the op-ed section after the 2020 election and see them raging about interracial white or multiracial whiteness for Hispanics in the Rio Grande Valley that voted for Trump, or for people like Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times saying we can replace them when it comes to voters in Georgia. You can't put that mask back on and say we're going to go back to politics as normal. And the same way, to see the actual energy, the electoral victory, and the money, there are a lot of people that are who are married to the system that would like to grift off of that and realize, well, if we can just say these things, if we can say that we're America first, if we can say that we want to make America great again, that we can be like that too. And no, because people can see through obvious lies, because anyone that has witnessed the last several decades of American politics, every election year, it's about defending America, peace through strength, close the border, cut the taxes, and nothing of that happens. Now, there are plenty of things to criticize about Trump, and there are plenty of right criticisms to levy against him. The over-reliance on executive orders, and instead placating the Republican Party with a tax cut rather than something on the border that was more definitive than just, a pen and a paper and a phone call. But at the end of the day, I also know that the people that are behind the Trump campaign and the Project 2025 people, and the people that you and I have both had conversations with about how you would seriously gut the civil service and even do more than that, gives me extreme, I want to go for the guys. Trump's a nice figurehead. He's a great fire starter. He's a great M80 in the anthill, right? And it's a good thing. This that anthill needs to go away. And unfortunately, an M80 is better than letting that anthill stay there. So this is the way that it's going to be. You can't go back to normal, not when so many people have made it abundantly clear that they hate you, and that they want America to get worse, and that they want things to progressively turn into Brazil or South Africa or China. And people are saying no to that, whether they get their will accomplished. I mean, you and I are not real big fans of democracy and its process for obvious reasons, as we've discussed on the show. And you've got a book coming out on how that all works. But it does indicate to the people that, listen, you're playing a game against a system that has been systematically targeting you for at least 60 years, if not more. And, if this is your one shot and it's one giant middle finger to the regime, and it's going to be like a firecracker or a bull in the china shop, why not take it?
Well, and I think people don't understand that the most important thing about Trump is not what Trump will do. Like, Trump is going to fail. Like, I hope he takes good steps. I hope that he makes big moves. I hope that he holds to his word. But I think fundamentally, Trump does not have the competency or follow through to get some of these things done. And I know a lot of people say, oh, then Ron DeSantis. I get it. But here is the most important thing about Trump. It's what the system is going to do to react to him. We already see NBC just ran a story about how lobbying groups are trying to get the military to ignore Trump, which they don't even need to do. He already did, right? But they already did, right? But that's the kind of stuff we're talking about here. The Trump drives the leftist establishment absolutely insane in a way that no one else does. Yes, they're going to talk about the terrors of Ron DeSantis or whoever else. They love Nikki Haley. Actually, they're not even going to bother with that. They haven't even bothered to pretend that Nikki Haley isn't their candidate in the Republican election. But they'll talk a game about other people and how scary they are. But with Trump, they make incredibly bad decisions that destroy themselves, and the system is going to destroy itself before Trump's going to destroy the system. That's just true. These people are going to tear themselves apart in public to try to destroy Trump before he ends up tearing the system apart. But that's kind of part of the battle, is somebody who will get these people kind of accelerate their insane desires so much and rip the mask so far off that they end up kind of destroying fundamental pillars of their power in order to do it. We saw just a little bit of this. I know we have varying opinions on this, but we saw just a little bit of this with the actions at Harvard, right? Where they were willing to undermine the credibility of Harvard, to say that Harvard degrees don't matter just so they could insult Chris Rufo. That's just a taste of the way that the left reacts to Trump. They're willing to completely strip away all of their credibility, destroy all of the kind of the myth around why they should be in charge, their political formula, and why they should be the ruling elite. They'll become completely unhinged, masked completely off to put away somebody like Trump. And so while he may not be the guy who's going to effectively manage every aspect of the dismantling of the federal bureaucracy, I think there are people, like you said, behind him who do understand the nature of the problem, who are working on many of these things, who will make more steps than there were in his previous administration, even though I still think not sufficiently. But I think that they do understand the problem better than they did before, and that they have a better plan for implementing this stuff. But ultimately, it's the way that the left is going to react to Trump that's going to make him the most valuable asset when we're working against, well, kind of the regime as it is.
I mean, this sort of does lend some credibility to the analysis put out by a certain shampoo magnate about the fragility of the regime. That you listen, we witnessed during the Trump administration the complete treason by the civil service. We saw the military commit treason by not telling Trump about the military presence in Syria, and was doing everything that they can to undermine him, both in the civil service, the courts, and in the public press and media. And again, Richard Nixon was right. The press is your enemy. The press is your enemy. Never forget that. But it does illustrate that, he's a bull in the china shop. And if that means that Trump is either the accelerationist take, or it's just the middle finger to the system as to why I voted for him in 2016 and did it again happily in 2020, then so be it. But it, again, as we talked about earlier, like the mask is off, and you can't put it back on. Things cannot go back to normal. What is normal, right? More offshoring of jobs, more illegal immigrants coming in that you want to replace, the people that have been here since the founding to go away and to dilute their vote. It's like money printing. It's the quantitative easing of democracy. Just print more votes, just bring in more voters. People are tired of it. And there's a reason why Trump has said what he said about immigration. There's a reason why people are working like Stephen Miller and the rest of them. Listen, like, these are civilizational problems. The United States of America cannot survive if this continues. And when the more people come together, whether it's on the internet or in real life, like importing, people and shipping them off to red state America in small towns, or we're going to take them to happy old New England and slap them in Maine, the least diverse state in the union, according to the unfortunate travel, labels and disadvantages of the USA Today. But it does illustrate, right, that is fundamentally untenable. It cannot last. And the more we come together, the more we realize that we're very different, and that the sort of egalitarian utopianism of modern liberalism fails right before our eyes. And Trump has the opinions of a 90s Democrat. I mean, no one would ever, he would be somewhere, he probably voted for Bill Clinton for all I know. But, it does illustrate that a 90s Democrat makes you a fascist in the echoes of the Third Reich in 2024 America. And that's how radically off course we've gotten. But it should be no surprise to anybody. This is where you're at, and this is how it's going to be. And the average voter doesn't have to be reading Bertrand de Juvenel or Carl Schmitt to know that the people in Washington and the people on the cable news headlines really hate my existence. And if there's one guy out there that remotely speaks to my existence and my needs and the people that, vote for the Republican Party, then yeah, I'm going to vote for him. And for some reason, this is some magical, elusive, holy grail formula that a lot of pundits can't seem to grasp.
Yeah, the couple things there. First, like you're saying, a lot of people have a hard time understanding this shift. I hear things all the time like, "Oh, well, this is the Republican Party moving to a model of victimhood," or this is people being unable to choose the more competent candidate. Guys, if you are lecturing the electorate, you are doing it wrong. Okay, if I may not like democracy, but at least I understand how it works. You're in complete denial about how it works. You don't even understand the mechanisms at play. But I think really importantly, like you're saying, immigration has to be an insane hair on fire issue for the right. They have to understand you are very close to no longer having any democratic power inside the United States. The Democrats understand all they have to do is run out the clock. All they have to do is run out the clock. They're importing entire states worth of future left voters. And another thing I hear from people all the time that is so brain dead, they're like, "Oh, well, these people can't vote right away. They're illegal immigrants." Do you not understand what's happening in your country? Do you not understand that many states have already made it entirely easy for these people to vote without needing proper documentation? And even if they can't, the fact that their children are immediately American citizens upon birth in the United States means that there's a permanent demographic shift in the United States that changes the electoral map for generations. But this is just so hard, I guess, for a lot of Republicans to grasp. Like you said, we still get these basically pathway to citizenship, mass what effectively is mass amnesty bills from the Republican side of the aisle. We still see people, and yeah, I believe that guys like DeSantis want to change immigration at some level. They do want to enforce the border at a higher level. I don't think that's something that they're blowing smoke about, but I don't think they understand the level, the desperate nature of what's happening. We're talking about permanent shifts that will make sure that democracy never goes your way ever again. The left understands exactly what they're doing, and all they have to do is keep you from taking action. That's why I'm hoping that Greg Abbott's actions are real and permanent and going to be expanded. I'm hoping to see guys like Ron DeSantis take leadership roles at the state level to shut down illegal immigration, because it's not happening at a federal level. I'm sorry, it's just not happening at a federal level. Hopefully, Trump gets into office and he can do a lot more. But you really need to see states who say, no, we're going to step up and we're going to fill the gaps where the federal government is falling down. And until you have that kind of urgency, that understanding this is an existential threat to any form of a political voice in the United States for the right, then you just don't understand what's happening. You're on the edge of this thing, and you can't really afford to continue to just twiddle your thumbs while the other side makes sure to just dilute your vote to the point where it's never going to matter again.
Yeah, I mean that's the fundamental fact of this election and of the times that we are in. And I know it sounds like a broken record for some people who are already tuned in to these things, but I mean, it's not just about illegal immigration. It also is about birthright citizenship. It is about the fact that there are members of Congress right now, like Representative Ted Lieu, who happily rejoices and joyously smirks and says it with a sneer and an uplifted nose about the fact that your demographics in this country are limited and your days are numbered in terms of electoral relevance. And I'm not the world's biggest fan of this guy, but he's the commentator that you had an interview with a while back, but he had said, like, listen, Democrats would like you dead, but they'll settle for your submission. Like, that's a very good point. And
Michael Malice?
Yeah, Michael Malice's point. Yeah, his name escaped me. Thank you. Yeah, he's absolutely right there. Like, they're okay if you're like a white Republican in California where your voice doesn't matter and you have to suffer because, you can vote, but we both know that vote really doesn't matter all that much. Outside of a few districts in the House of Representatives where, California still has Republicans. And so, again, this is that statement is true. They want they want you dead, but they'll settle for your submission, and they'll get that submission by permanently changing the demographics of this country. And it's insane to think about, because this was something that, despite her sort of positions on politics now, is something that Ann Coulter was right about, over 15 years ago, and that got her banned from ever speaking at CPAC again. But this is the fundamental reality of how our electoral system is. And so if one guy is willing to say, listen, you got to send people back and you actually have to have a border that exists, then so be it. And I think Greg Abbott should be the example that Governor Ron DeSantis and others do when it comes to illegal immigration and migration in general. Is that, listen, the United States Border Patrol is facilitating the invasion of the United States. Tell them to pound sand. And again, all these things facilitate the same fundamental point about regime fragility. And if they're doing all of this out and open and in the public, that kind of hubris usually means that you're desperate or you have a lot of power. And as we can see between trying to manage 3 different areas of conflict at once, the fragility of our supply chain systems and the inability to have, competent airlines or even competent, military recruitment numbers, it illustrates that things are not as strong as they may be. And the more you can do to put stressors on the regime, the better, because this is fundamentally unsustainable. And I'm not an advocate for anything illegal, but it does illustrate that the position we're in right now is tenuous at best, but outright on the brink of disaster much sooner than we think.
What do you think about Vivek's immediate withdrawal after this? I mean, obviously he came in last, so you understand that part, but many people, myself included, kind of pointed out that it didn't feel like Vivek was really running for president so much as playing the Trump proxy. Trump couldn't be there in the debates, or rather he shouldn't be there in the debates due to political strategy. And so you needed someone who was going to voice something that was very close to the vision that he had, to the policies that he had, but wasn't going to be sticking in for the long term, didn't really have delusions that he was going to win that election. What do you think? Was Vivek always a Trump proxy? Was that just a happy accident? Is it actually his position in the results that he withdrew? What do you think's going on there?
Well, up until very recently, just a few days before the caucuses, I mean, Trump had been more or less mum on Vivek Ramaswamy, which makes me think that perhaps those two had some communication. It wasn't until leading up, like a week before the caucuses, did Trump just unleash on Truth Social that Vivek Ramaswamy is not MAGA or Make America Great Again or whatever. And so to me, I feel like that was a signal of saying, listen, Vivek, we've probably got some deals going on. Drop out after Iowa, give me your endorsement and serve as my proxy. Again, I don't work for any of these campaigns. I'm not getting any checks from anybody. If I were, I'd be driving a much better car than I am now, but neither here nor there. It does illustrate to me, I think, that that sudden heel turn, right? Like about face, like, all right, Vivek is the threat now. Really does illustrate that he's served his purpose, which has been platforming the ideas of what a Trump administration would look like. He has diverted all of this energy away from Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, from attacking Trump. They were all focused on Vivek Ramaswamy. The only person who didn't take that bait, which is funny considering he loves to eat everything, was Chris Christie. He was the only one attacking Trump directly, whereas everyone in the debate stage focused on Vivek. I think Vivek will probably have some sort of cabinet position if Trump wins, or if Trump announces some sort of ticket lineup for what his government will look like. But he has served a very good job at platforming ideas like, the Great Replacement and so on, even if they were worded slightly differently. He's done a lot of good at making himself sound interesting. And in a lot of ways, he sounded a lot like Curtis Yarvin about like the administrative state and what to do with the regime. And so, I mean, it's a shame, press F and chat for H-1B mold bug, but it is good that a sign for potentiality that maybe Trump will now be more active in the primary, because I think he knows who his threats are. And his threats, of course, are the Biden administration openly coordinating with these officials, trying to prosecute him and put him in jail, but also the Republican Party that wants someone like Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis to be on the ballot instead of him. And Vivek has some pull, and it does illustrate, I think, some of the background inner workings of the RNC. This isn't the first time that we've seen a push to change the RNC in general. On the debate stage, Vivek called out Ronald McDaniel to resign. I mean, this wasn't the first challenge that she had either. I mean, Kamit Dillon also tried to seize the RNC chairmanship away from her. And so, there's sort of this background balance between sort of maybe like a more Mormon waspish contingent of the Republican Party versus the sort of up-and-coming multi-ethnic aspect that the GOP wants between Hispanic voters and those from the Indian subcontinent. So we're seeing a lot of interesting things play out with the RNC, but him endorsing Trump is a good thing. And him and Tucker Carlson, who I have my gripes with, sure, but both of those two have served very good jobs at being Trump proxies and speaking for Trump and Trumpism. So may they continue to do so.
What do you think about the shift of kind of the hatred of the neocon core? I mean, I think one thing we could all agree on is that the kind of the hatred for the policies of Nikki Haley. I mean, DeSantis is a little closer, I think, than the rest to that, but even he seemed to be pretty hostile to a number of the kind of neocon assertions of Haley. If nothing, whether DeSantis legitimately opposes those or not, he certainly knows he has to. And isn't that a great sign that that in the Republican primary, the position people need to take, unless they're trying to cash donor checks, if they actually want to connect with the base, is that, the kind of the neocon attitude is dead. We don't want endless war. We don't want to be a proxy for funneling money to weapons contractors. That the kind of that shift away from what would have been a standard bearing portion of the party just an election cycle or two ago, I think is a pretty good sign going forward about what the Republican Party is, or at least what the
Yeah,
base is, if not the party.
yeah, well, I mean, the base is, in full agreement with Trump's positions on immigration. They could really care less about trying to go to war again in the Middle East, or trying to send billions of dollars to someone that is actively, depopulated the nation of Ukraine and has persecuted Christians in that area. So I think it really does indicate that, the neoconservatives, however, are rearing their ugly head again. And we have to understand that neoconservatism did not start out as the way that we know it from the early 2000s. When you look up that famous article, What the Heck is a Neoconservative? Max Boot will tell you that it's primarily based on foreign policy and it's based on America's relationship to Israel and the Middle East. It didn't start that way.
Right.
It started much earlier in the 60s and 70s as a reaction to the Civil Rights Act and racial quotas that were being challenged in the court. You see this with Norman Podhoretz and his son John, who would later work in H.W. Bush and with Ronald Reagan as a speechwriter. And you're seeing that happen now. And I know that you and I we don't see completely eye to eye on it, but I mean, that's part of the Harvard stuff. I mean, Bill Ackman, right? He was interested in having a Democrat that could challenge Trump. I mean, so let's go listen to Dean Phillips on a Twitter space, not, how do we work with the Republicans on anything or anything like that. So neoconservatism is making it's rearing its ugly head again. Nikki Haley is the ultimate representation of that. And again, she is just an Indian version of Hillary Clinton running as a Republican. And that has to be voted out, and it has to be institutionally crushed and destroyed. The problem is that there is a lot of moneyed interests that want that to stay as part and parcel for it. And there are a lot of people that still buy into that, as we saw by her third place results in the Iowa caucuses. I mean, she actually won one county out of 99. I mean, it could have been a complete Trump sweep, but she literally won by one vote in the university town. So in that county in Iowa. So, I mean, it does illustrate that that's the real challenge, and neoconservatism has to die. If America wants to live, neoconservatism has to go. Because if not, the GOP is going to be the same party it has always been, where it is a beautiful loser, loses with honor, always rah-rahs about the military, taxes, and the border, but always submits itself, as it should, as the outer party, as a loser, to the powers that be. And if the base knows that that's a bunch of, a crock of crap, the base wants something completely different. I mean, this is why there's people willing to vote for Trump over and over and over again. And so be it, right? But unfortunately, neoconservatism is resurging, and it's going to resurge, especially during an election year. And I mean, it feels a lot like 1968 in some ways. You've got a war going on in the Middle East. You've got open ethnic resentment happening in the streets, as well as within the news cycle. And you've got the Republican Party fighting over differing factions and what to do. And the left is fractured between its old style guard of Biden and more radical progressive elements inside the party as well in the Congress. So clearly where we're at right now is an echo of the past. And just like in the 1960s, we saw neoconservatism be born, we're seeing it reemerge its ugly head again as well. So it's important for us to study our electoral history as much as we look at our day-to-day politics.
Do you think these people really want a war with Iran? I mean, I know that they're stirring the pot, but doesn't that seem insane? Like, they still haven't technically wound down Ukraine yet. And of course, Israel is having everything that's going on. I mean, is the United States government really foolish enough to start a full scale conflict with a country that can actually fight back, because that seems insane. Like I've written articles about why these people are wild-eyed, insane people, and they'll take us right off the cliff. And I believe that, but even for me, who's incredibly cynical about the kind of level of competence and restraint of our elites, that does seem crazy, right? Like if they go into that is a full scale civilizational collapse scenario. It feels like if they get the wrong bounce out of a war with Iran.
Well, I think that the US government's in a really complicated position, like regardless of how you feel about Israel or going to war with Iran, right? Like I know that John McCain is looking up at us right now and is just begging that, even in hell he can get that war with Iran happening. But
Cool drink of water. Yeah.
yeah, it would be, yeah. But even I won't go too far into scriptural references there. But yes, not
Yeah.
even a drop of water to cool his tongue would be a
Yeah.
war in Iran. But the thing is that the shipping attacks that have happened in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. I mean, historically speaking, attacks on American maritime shipping is like the oldest casus belli
Right.
in American history. Like the war with the Barbary States and our other piracy cleanup efforts throughout the 20th and 21st century. I mean, it's a very straight, open and shut case, like attacking American shipping. This affects American national security interests. We're going to go bomb the people that are doing this. The problem, however, is that, despite Biden's efforts to try and tell the Israelis to maybe cool it a little bit, there seems to be no ceasefire in Gaza anytime soon. And the Israelis have said that the war is going to continue for the foreseeable future in the months ahead. Major maritime shipping insurance companies have said that most maritime shipping will continue to go around Africa for the time being, or at least those that are aligned with Western and American shipping. And so just avoid the area lest you get caught in the crossfire. And despite the American and British efforts to bomb them, there's still attacks happening. And Iran has the capability of striking with its own domestic munitions and arms and whatnot. It can produce those things. And we've already seen, even prior to the war in Gaza, from October 7th, that there were strikes against Iranian munitions facilities. You could say that even without a declaration of war from the Iranians or the American Congress, like we are at war with Iran, at least via proxy. We have been for years in Yemen, between the Israelis, the Saudis, and the Americans, helping fight the Houthis, as well as the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians have been supporting the Houthis as well. This war has the very likely ability to escalate. And all it takes is for that security dilemma to trigger either miscommunication or, someone doesn't get orders clear enough and directly, and things get hot very fast. The problem is that America doesn't have the positions it had in Iraq or in Afghanistan as it once did. And, there's the very real likelihood that it could happen. I think that the United States government, whatever is left of old guard State Department officials, knows that that's not a tenable position for us to do. And we're not in a position to do it. I mean, from whether because we don't have the capacity to build, our ammunition stores desperately need to be refilled and restored. And plus, we still have a major recruiting crisis going on. And it's hard to convince the average American because most combat deaths in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were predominantly white males who tended to vote Republican. And those guys aren't signing up to fight for Uncle Sam anymore. That, this leads to severe questions about America's military readiness. And this is something that our regional allies in Europe and in the Middle East are concerned about. So it does put America in a very tenuous position. Is war with Iran likely? There's always potential. You can't rule it out. But I think that the U.S. government, alongside the Iranians and the Chinese and the Russians, are like, well, maybe let's not go into traditional, like, state versus state power conflict, because we already know what that looks like, and it looks like Ukraine. And despite our efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq, the war in Ukraine is vastly different, very trench based, less open movement, and we've seen the power of drones far greater than any of the stuff that we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, I just, to sort of make a long story short, it's not impossible that there could be war with Iran, but I think even the people who are trying to keep this weekend at Bernie's administration afloat know that we're not in a position to do it, at least just yet.
So we've got obviously New Hampshire near the end of the month, and then we've got Nevada. South Carolina is going to be interesting because, of course, that's Haley's home state. If Trump crushes her there, then you have to wonder. I mean, I guess she just sticks in no matter what because she's got the funding of kind of the institutions, and she can just hang out to see if Trump gets removed. But and then a loss inside her own home state would be pretty devastating. And then you've got Michigan, a few more, and then you get to Super Tuesday at the beginning of March. What are your predictions for kind of candidates hanging in? I know predictions are always the most exciting part of any of these, but do you think that all of these, we're now down to three really? Do you think that all three of these candidates will be able to hang in until Super Tuesday? Do you think I think Haley's going to have the donations no matter what, but I do wonder if Ron DeSantis can continue to fund himself to Super Tuesday if he doesn't pick up a pretty big win in a place like New Hampshire.
I think that Ron will, between Nikki and Ron, I think Ron will drop out first. And the question's really going to be, who does Ron endorse? And again, like, it's this procedural bit over delegates, and we saw what happened to Ron Paul in 2012. We saw what happened with sort of people telling the delegates to vote with their conscience in the 2016 Republican National Convention when it comes to making Trump the nominee, and so many efforts to stop him. But I'm not a betting man. I'm not a man to make predictions. I try and look at how things are and go from there. I would say that Nikki will stay in probably up until the convention. I mean, it reminds me of the 2008 election where, like, Mike Huckabee stayed on way longer than he should have against John McCain. But I see DeSantis dropping out first between the three of them. But I mean, if Trump wants to, I don't think Trump should rest on his laurels. I mean, he's already fighting against the regime in terms of all those legal cases and the federal courts, the primary ballot situation alongside Georgia, New York. He needs to be seen more. Because, I mean, again, I think the reason why so many people thought that DeSantis or Nikki would do so much better in Iowa than they did is because there's been zero media focus on Trump. He's this looming elephant in the room, this bright orange elephant that no one wants to really talk about. But Trump needs to make his face seen. It was cool when he tweeted out the mugshot on twitter.com after he got his account reinstated. You need to go back to Twitter. You need to go back to being more of a media blitz. You need to be doing more interviews. You need to say yes to the camera more often. People need to see you. I know some people would say the less that we see of Trump, the more people like him, and compared to what people are saying. And there's some valid arguments for that. But Trump needs to start fighting more, And I mean, it's good when people like Vivek or J.D. Vance or Rand Paul are doing the whole never Nikki stuff. That's a good thing. But if Trump wants to coast into the RNC victory, I think he needs to seriously put the effort in the ground game. And that's what's really going to matter going forward. But DeSantis will probably drop out first before Nikki Haley. Don't hold me to that, but that's just my gut check that people want the warmonger, the Indian Hillary, will stay in much longer than the governor of Florida will in this race.
Yeah, if due to funding, if nothing else, the institutional level of
funding and spite.
Yeah, powerful weapons. All right, man. Well, we're going to go ahead and pivot over to the questions of the people. But before we do that, please tell them where to find your excellent content.
Yes, as always, Auron, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and your wonderful audience over here at The Blaze. You can find me over on YouTube, Twitter, Substack, Libsyn. All of my links can be found at findmyfriends.net/The Prudentialist. Just look for the frog and you'll find me there. I just put out a brand new episode of our Stalin's War series. I've been reading through it chapter by chapter with guests, breaking down Sean McMeekin's fantastic history of World War II and just how evil Stalin was and how you really don't hate FDR as much as you think that you should. And alongside that, later this week, I will have an essay out on how to re-enchant the world. So if you're interested in all that sort of stuff, go ahead and look for me. You can't miss the frog. And as always, Auron, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, man. All right, let's go over to our super chats here. Mr. McGee says, if only Trump was as bad as they say he is. Yes, we all deserve the Trump the media is afraid of.
I wish we lived the world of the liberal nightmare, because every time they, like, did you see that advertisement they put out where it was like January 2025 and you live in quadrants and you have your mandatory patriotism day? It's like, where's that world? Right. Like, give me the right-wing Hunger Games, man. Like, this is, instead I got like lame tweets about how, like, he's not MAGA. And I'm like, yeah, but we could be cooler. We could be cooler.
Fewer trading cards, more dystopian. No.
Yeah, less NFTs, more based world,
Let's see. Tamid Hassan Arat, maybe, hopefully. No enemies on the right is a good principle. How about the corollary? No friends on the left. Are alliances with non-right groups possible? This is a good question. A lot of people are reaching out to the left. I think you do have to reach out to the left. I don't think there's anything wrong with having some level of dialogue there. I think that's kind of still part of what's going on. I think the mistake people make is when they attempt to incorporate. They think that if they can shift the party just a little to the left, if they could just shift the ideas a little to the left, then they'll go ahead and secure victory. They'll get that middle ground. They'll bring all these kind of moderates over, and then they'll kind of have that electoral victory. My my uh, my attempt to avoid the neocon cycle is always the same. Don't welcome anyone in until they've told you they're completely wrong. They were completely wrong, and they plan to change their ways. No. Oh, I didn't leave the left. The left left me. No, that's not useful. You want people who have truly seen the right, said I've made a mistake, not people who said, oh, I was betrayed and I was right the whole time. Those people are of no use to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of my favorite people I like to talk to are leftists. I think sometimes they're morons, but they're fun people to talk to, right? And they can give you a perspective of what the other side thinks. But if you are craving, and this is the problem that, whether you call it the neocon cycle or not, if you're craving the approval and attention of leftists, you're a leftist at heart.
Yeah,
you're not a rightist, and you should go back to that camp and just stop trying to play the act. I mean, this is the problem James Lindsay has, right? Like, he is a leftist spiritually, and unfortunately he hasn't decided to go back to his camp. He's still doing the left me thing, and he's going to be isolated and alone and cringe for the rest of his days.
People don't understand that your identification here is not your ideology, it's the status hierarchy you're looking at. If your status hierarchy you're trying to evaluate yourself in is the leftist one, you're a leftist. Like that's where you come from. If you are looking towards a more right-wing hierarchy, then that's the direction. Whether or not you like are espousing free market capitalism at the time, that's not the critical thing. If you are in kind of sociologically, if that's the way the direction you're looking, that's the way you're lining up, that's how you're to orient yourself in every other aspect. It's not just the current checklist of ideology that makes you right wing or left wing. Trey says everyone just needs to watch the Michael Moore speech about Trump being a Molotov cocktail for average Americans over and over until they understand the moment we're in. Absolutely. Michael Moore understands the current moment much better than many political commentators on the right. He just does. He is wrong about all kinds of other things, but he was right about that. He understood that particular moment in time, and that is still true. And if you don't keep that in the forefront of your analysis, people always make this mistake. They're like, "Oh, you're pro this, or you're pro that." I'm really not. Like I don't think democracy works at all. That's not the point. The point is I'm trying to make accurate political assessments, and when I do that, mainly because I'm kind of disconnected from, oh, I need to, my vote is the most important thing in the world, and I need to emotionally support the right candidate, because like I can kind of disassociate myself from that. I can just look at the facts and say, this is what's happening. This is the way that people are approaching this election, and it's not about perfect policy positions, and it's not about perfect execution. It's I want to throw a Molotov cocktail at the edifice of my enemies. Like that.
Yeah, I mean that's why I voted for him, and I'll happily vote for him again. And yeah, that's the woke are more correct than the mainstream sometimes, and that was one of those instances. Michael Moore was 100% right.
He really was. Creeper Weirdo says people are calling it the mono party for a reason. Absolutely. And he also follows up with reminder: the right could elect Jesus Christ with Mr. Rogers as VP, and tomorrow, and you still be getting interviews with Judas. They think you're the bad guy. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we nominated Mitt Romney, right? Like we nominated Mitt Romney, the cleanest cut guy. Like the most polite guy. He's doing all the things that the left says they care about. They don't care. They're still gonna call him the worst things. They're still gonna portray him as evil. So don't pretend like that matters. That's not gonna make a difference.
Yeah, that's a very good super chat, Creeper Weirdo. It's so true. Jesus Christ could be running for president, and Judas and Barbarous would be on the opposing ticket, and they'd be voting and fortifying it for him.
They'd say, "Give me Bar." Yeah,
yeah.
Give me Barabbas. All right. Ronald McNuggets says, what could convince you AA is right, that the regime will normalize Trump, woke goes away, and he prolongs the lifespan of the regime? So, what would convince me of this would be a leftist acceptance of the legitimacy of Trump. And I don't think that's coming because it didn't happen last time, and they've already made it very clear that they won't allow it. Again, we're getting articles from NBC about why military officers should commit treason, like why flag officers should commit treason. Those are those that's the starting position of the elites right now. I don't see them getting a hold of themselves and legitimizing Trump. But if they do, AA will have been right.
I think that the way you would see AA be right is that neocons win. That's that straightforward. Neoconservatism has always served as the containment for the radical fringes of the American right, whether
Mhm.
they've destroyed the John Birch Society, which was right about most things, and or even more of the new right elements that emerged in the 1980s with people like Sam Francis and Bob Whitaker and others that were like seriously, campaigning for Ronald Reagan and the Reagan Revolution, and watched that be contained, as Pat Buchanan wrote about, where the right went wrong. If the neocons manage to successfully contain any of this energy, and they give you these milk toast compromises as they have years and years and years and years before throughout the last 60 years, then that's the woke getting put away. And if the neocons win, then I think AA is right.
Denise B says the whole MAGA slogan implies going back to normal. I don't see Trump or his supporters having a coherent future vision. Do you see one? No, no, of course not. No, there's no coherent ideological or, more importantly, kind of moral vision set forward for the country. I don't think anyone at the moment really has the ability to bind these 50 states together behind kind of one vision of where we're going, one identity of who we could be. I don't think that exists right now. However, while I don't think that we could go back to normal, I do think that there is at least a understanding that there is a connection to the past, a connection to a legacy that is honorable, that is valuable, that matters, and should be carried into the future, that does exist in MAGA, and that's more of the stuff that's valuable about it rather than getting things back to normal. I don't think that's happening either way.
Yeah, and that's why we said the Michael Moore thing was correct. Was it's a
Right.
Molotov cocktail, and I mean that's why people want to vote for him, because people don't see a coherent vision for the future outside of gay race communism that we see from the left. So if me wanting to destroy or having a schizophrenic view of politics means that doesn't happen, I think people are more than happy to vote for the guy who may not have any idea what to do next. But the nice thing is that there are the Project 2025 people, the Center for American Renewal. While they're not 100% on board with some of the things maybe I agree with, right, or that I would want for America, they at least have a vision, and Trump is the entry vehicle for that vision to happen. So, I mean, you're going to get a bull in a china shop, but there are some people in the background that are casually like buying the bill of sale and the deeds for certain properties and lenses and things like that. So there's a vision, but it's not Trump's. But there are people working with Trump that have a vision, so there's some hope, I guess.
Life of Brian says, re Harvard, given Gay's background in the Haitian construction and how aggressively she was promoted, protected, has anyone found a Clinton link? Good question. I have not looked into that. I'm not aware of that currently. However, at this point, I think that Gay has been removed from view, and that will probably be the last you'll ever hear about her. I think she'll simply be replaced with someone who is as progressive, maybe more friendly to Israel than she was, or the cause of censorship on behalf of Israel. But otherwise will be as leftist. I don't think that's why I think Moldbug had some good points. While I still think it's a victory for Rufo, I think that you do have to understand that kind of once she's out of the limelight, that institution remains more or less the same. And
According to Gay's little background on an article from 2018, I just looked it up. Her parents came to the United States over 50 years ago, so I doubt that there is a Bill Clinton link from the 90s. That must have been in the 1970s or so. So probably not. But I'm more on the side that Claudine's the quote unquote scalping is not as big of a victory as people are making it out to be. Yes, targeting the regime for its credibility is always good, but again, I think this is just the reemergence of the neocons into the main public political stream.
Logo here says, find Trump's rhetoric about Latinas as not their best poison is irrelevant to immigration and only serves to throw away votes. How do you explain? Again, I would think you just have to look at the numbers for those that voted for Trump. I don't think that kind of the Hispanic community necessarily agrees with you. I think many people in the Hispanic community who might be tempted to vote Republican already understand that they came here for a reason, and they were looking to get away from much of kind of where they were at, and they would like to make sure that America stays America so that they and their children can enjoy the benefits of an American lifestyle. So I don't see a whole lot of evidence that Trump has scared away Hispanic voters with that particular rhetoric. And I think it is important for him to emphasize the importance of ending immigration. So I don't really see a lot of downside of that. And either way, I don't think pandering to that demographic is the way to win either way. So that would be my response.
Additionally, most Republicans agree with it, and the people that voted in the primaries agree with it more than the average polling, according to CBS, on those remarks. And also, immigration is a huge reason. Immigration and economics are the two main reasons why the traditionally democratic Rio Grande Valley in South Texas that borders the United States and Mexico went for Trump in 2020. This is why you saw multiracial whiteness. And so far, that seems to be the winning strategy is that you can either try and pursue this quote unquote like white understanding of how like politics work in America. And like, yeah, you're going to be called, multiracial whiteness and bigots or Nazis by the left. But hey, we're the ones that want to make sure your job isn't cut or offshored. And so, yeah, I mean, people are going to go for it. And the Republicans definitely see that their base knows what times it is. I mean, if it throws away votes to some people, odds are that person wasn't going to vote for Trump to begin with.
Yep, I agree. Mint20 says, I feel like I'm going crazy when I talk to Normicons and they think everything is fine. The hour is later than you think. We have maybe 5 years to do with immigration. That's if I'm optimistic. Yeah, I think that a lot of, I wouldn't say that this is something that Normicons in general maybe don't understand, because I think the base does understand this kind of deeply. Maybe they don't understand the timeline, but they understand this is an incredibly urgent issue. That's the reason that Trump has the level of support among the base that he has. So I understand, a lot of people who probably conventionally listen to a lot of talk radio and things maybe are parroting back certain, oh, well, it's not as big a deal, but I don't think that's the case. I think the base does understand this. I think really the party structure, the kind of establishment is really the only ones that don't act as if this is an existential crisis. And they're a little frustrated that the base keeps forcing this issue onto them, especially in kind of the person of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, even people on the left, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and even Dean Phillips, are like, listen, this is unsustainable and we need to do something about it. I mean, everyone but the regime that doesn't have anyone really waspy at all in that cabinet are more than happy to continue to facilitate what they are. I mean, Mayorkas comes from the board of numerous, immigrant rights groups that facilitate immigration into America, legal and illegal. So, I mean, I think people know how late it is. Unfortunately, the average pundit doesn't like touching issues that make them sound like they are extreme, even though addressing the blatantly obvious isn't extreme at all.
I mean, even Fetterman said that the border's a crisis, right? And he has brain damage, so
maybe we just need more brain damaged politicians, or maybe that's the way America's democracy can survive. Just more Fettermans, please.
The only way out is through. The only way out is through. All right. Tiny Rick says, win or lose in 2024, what do you guys think the Democratic primary looks and sounds like in 2028? Jeez, I don't even know, man. I mean, what does the Democratic bench even look like at this point? Gavin Newsom, right?
Governor Pritzker, I guess.
Okay.
Anyone who maybe Pete Buttigieg runs again. Although I
Mm.
don't know how you convince black voters to vote for a gay white male. So I don't know what the 2028 thing looks like for the Democratic primary. I just know that regardless of who runs in the 2028 Democratic primary, they're all evil and they hate me and they hate you. So it's still going to be bad no matter who.
Yep, absolutely. Norwegian Cross says, "Do you think that there's a difference between America First and America Only?" Yeah, I have heard. I've heard people. How do I say this? People with neocon leanings like to turn this phrase. They say, "Oh well, there's a difference between America First and America Only. You don't have to be an isolationist to put America first. In fact, being an isolationist is not prioritizing America. You have to protect your allies." And that sounds a lot like we need to maintain our empire and we need to involve ourselves in foreign conflicts whenever, the military and industrial complex needs an infusion of revenue. I am very skeptical of this. I agree. A Prudentialist is going to be the first guy I think to tell you, as kind of the international relations guy, that you need to have a sphere of influence, that geopolitics is real, and that you do have to have some level of military intervention or military interest in foreign conflicts or foreign areas. But I am worried about that phrasing because it does seem to pop up only when people are trying to convince me that I need to go to war in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, also the isolationist thing has been a slur against Americans that wanted a more realistic or were skeptical about our adventurism abroad. We saw this most especially during the interwar years and our lead up to World War II, where there was a lot of distaste in people's mouths for wanting to give money to the Soviets. Avowed communists that we had barely normalized relationships with just a few years prior. So yeah, that'll happen again. I mean, the unfortunate reality, and this is why it's called a tragedy of great power politics, is that America is a great power, and maintaining hegemony in an empire is part and parcel. And even leftists, even turned reactionaries like Bill Williams, will tell you that like empire is a way of life for the United States, and it has been since the beginning. The question becomes like, how do you manage that? Do you manage that in a way that benefits the American people, or do you do it that manages to benefit everyone but America? And unfortunately, the American regime has done everything to hurt America. And that's the problem. Is the neoconservatives will take advantage of that. People on the left will take advantage of that. And I get it, right? Like some people are like, yeah, I work for Raytheon because morality doesn't pay the bills. But I'm also against Raytheon to some extent because yeah, morality doesn't have to pay the bills, but it sure as hell doesn't mean I have to watch my country be turned into an economic zone for your benefit.
Balthazar for $5 says, "I think a major lesson the right needs to learn is that we are both rural and urban, the trade workers and the university bros." Yeah, so here's the thing, right? As someone from the South, I'm constantly told that no, we have to be in the more urban centers. We have to fight for these areas, and I hear that, but I don't really see people who say that ever having a path forward or understanding a way forward that secures them a continuity of culture in those areas. It seems like they almost exclusively exist to eventually meld their children into that way of life. I don't understand how they plan to actually like revive a conservative kind of way of life in those environments. I'm not against what you're saying. I just think it's usually code for a lot of urbanites to tell me that actually they have the right to rule the rural folk, and the rural folk need to sit down and shut up and let Shake Shack Americans reign supreme. And I'm not unsympathetic to the fact that the cities are important. But every time I hear this, it seems it comes from people who don't really have a plan going forward as to kind of how they're going to turn that two family conservative beachhead in their kind of urban environment into something that actually builds a vision that is more right wing.
Yeah, and I mean the thing too about like the urban rural divide is as much as people like to debate about like Shake Shack nationalism or whatever. Thanks, Mystery Grove, for that idea. But it really does illustrate that it's not, the geographic divide matters, yes, because it talks about economic opportunity, education, trades, etc. But also, it's like folding a map and punching a pen right through the paper. The internet has destroyed a lot of the cultural differences between this. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I live in a place where people ride their horses to like the park or to school. But as soon as they get off that horse and tied to the hitching post or whatever, doesn't matter. They're still going to sound like every other Zoomer that you see in, a major urban area. The culture has been radicalized because of the internet. The economic opportunities are vastly different. You do need both. You need a coalition of both. And a lot of places, this goes especially if you're a Christian, a lot of places where people converted early were the cities. The word pagan doesn't mean that there's some strange religion. It goes back to the root word for not from the city, an outsider, a ruralite. And that's an important thing to consider. Like, yes, our cities are a place of culture and change. This is why you have that conversation about dark elves, right? Like, Yarvin is basically saying, like, the coastal people have the cultural and financial capital to affect change. Like, you can either sit back and let them do their job, which is what he wants, but people righteously, and especially for Southerners who have witnessed outsiders try to continue Reconstruction forever, the left likes to treat Reconstruction like it never happened, and it did happen, and it was a good thing, and we should do it more. They're like the opposite of certain parts of the far right, but it does illustrate that I want people who are good rulers, but I also want them to, either have my values or to leave me alone. And I know that they won't leave me alone, so they better have my values or have some lists of agreements where we can agree to work together on things. And unfortunately, we see this with the Republican Party. We see this in the dissident right, that there's oftentimes not a lot of agreement and just a lot of people flinging turds at each other across the hallway of the zoo.
And Crooper Weirdo says, when Hassan goes soft on Trump, then we know AA gets the win. Until then, The Rock will never be president. All right, guys, that's everybody's super chat. Thank you guys so much for listening. Of course, thank you, Prudentialist, for once again coming on and providing excellent commentary. Everybody make sure that they are checking out his content. And if you would like to go ahead and subscribe to this channel, if it's your first time on the channel, then you'll be able to go ahead and catch these streams when they go live by clicking the notifications thing. Guys, I hear a lot of people saying, I can't find the streams. When are they happening? You got to do the notifications. Otherwise, YouTube doesn't understand. Just because you're subscribed to me doesn't mean you actually want to see any of the content, right? So make sure that you do that. And of course, if you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do that, leave a rating or review. It helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.